It was just another ordinary day on the busy streets, bustling with vendors and shoppers, when a woman in a designer dress walked past a street vendor. The man, hunched over his makeshift stall, was selling his artwork paintings and sketches, all created with his own hands. She scoffed at the sight, her eyes rolling as she passed him by, convinced that his work was nothing more than cheap, unrefined scribbles. But what she didn't know was that the man behind the stall wasn't just any street vendor. He wasn't some struggling artist trying to make ends meet. No, he was someone far more influential, someone whose work had been sought after by the most prestigious galleries around the world. As the woman continued to mock his art, she had no idea that her judgment would soon come back to haunt her. Little did she know, the very man she'd dismissed so easily was about to turn her world upside down. How would she react when she learns the truth about the artist she so carelessly ridiculed? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. The woman continued her walk, not sparing another glance at the street vendor. She was used to seeing people like him, artists, dreamers, people who didn't understand the realities of the world. She had worked hard for everything she had. Her life was filled with luxury, expensive dinners, and high-profile events. She didn't have time to waste on people who didn't know how to make something of themselves. In her mind, the vendor was just another person trying to scrape by, offering something that could never match the value of the polished works she was used to. Meanwhile, the vendor sat quietly at his stall, his eyes not on the passing crowd, but on his latest piece, a painting of a cityscape, vibrant with life and energy. It wasn't just a scene to him, it was a story. Each brushstroke had meaning, each color had purpose. But to most, it was just another piece of street art. The vendor, however, wasn't just any artist. His work had been featured in prestigious galleries in cities around the world. He had once been celebrated for his creativity, but somewhere along the way, fame had faded, and so had his place in the art world. Now, he was back to the streets, his work both a passion and a quiet rebellion against the commercialized world of high-end galleries. The woman, still unaware of the man's true identity, continued on her path. She was headed to a meeting with an art collector who had been pursuing her for months, hoping to work with her on a new project. She was an art critic, well known for her sharp eye and ability to discern the true value of any piece. Her opinion was sought after, and her approval could make or break an artist's career. She had spent years building her reputation, and nothing could shake her confidence. Yet, the encounter with the street vendor lingered in her mind. It wasn't the first time she'd come across someone like him, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. She shook it off, telling herself that it was just a fleeting moment, nothing more than a passing thought. She had more important things to focus on, like the meeting ahead. As she entered the gallery, she was greeted by the collector, a well-dressed man with an air of sophistication. They exchanged pleasantries, but the woman's mind wasn't entirely on the conversation. She couldn't help but think back to the street vendor, his weathered face, and the way he had looked at her as she walked by. It was almost as if he knew something she didn't. But that was ridiculous. She was the expert, the one who understood art better than anyone else. The conversation shifted to the collector's latest acquisition, a piece by an up-and-coming artist who had recently gained significant attention. The woman studied the painting closely. It was technically impressive, no doubt, but something about it felt hollow to her. She had seen this style before, polished, commercialized, designed to appeal to the masses. It lacked the raw emotion, the depth of a true artist's soul. She couldn't bring herself to praise it, despite the collector's insistence. But then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend who had been following the art scene more closely than she had in recent years. The message read, "You won't believe this. The street artist you mocked earlier today? He's been invited to showcase his work at the Louvre next month. Turns out, he's a renowned artist who's been hiding in plain sight. His pieces are worth millions." The woman froze. Her mind raced as she processed the words. It couldn't be. She had seen him, the man with the weathered face, sitting on the street corner, surrounded by his paintings. She had laughed at him, dismissed him as nothing more than a failed artist. But now she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Her heart pounded in her chest as she excused herself from the meeting, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and regret. How could she have been so wrong? How could she have been so blind? She had spent years building her reputation, and now, in one moment, it all felt like it was slipping away. She couldn't let it go. She had to find out more. She had to know who this man really was and why he had chosen to hide his true identity. Was he hiding from something? Or was it all part of some elaborate game? As the woman left the gallery, she found herself walking back to the street where she had seen the vendor earlier. Her steps were quick, her mind racing with questions. When she arrived at the spot, the stall was gone. The street was quieter now, the vendor nowhere in sight. Had he known she would come back? Was this part of his plan all along? The woman stood there, unsure of what to do next. She felt like a fool, her pride shattered. The world she had built one of polished art, high-profile critiques, and designer labels felt suddenly empty, shallow. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to see through the facade. But now, she was the one who had been fooled. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of something in the distance. A figure standing near an alleyway, sketching something on a piece of paper. It was him, the street vendor. He was still there, working in the shadows, creating something that no one seemed to understand. But now, she saw him differently. She saw the passion in his eyes, the dedication in his hands. She saw the artist he truly was. But before she could approach him, he vanished into the crowd, leaving her with nothing but the lingering question: why had he chosen to remain in the shadows? Why had he allowed her to mock him without revealing who he really was? The tension in the air was thick, and the woman felt the weight of her mistake pressing down on her. She had underestimated him, and now she had to face the consequences. But what would they be? Would he confront her, or would he continue to stay hidden, letting her live with the regret of her actions? As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The man had more to teach her, more to reveal. And she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the truth. The woman walked aimlessly down the street, her thoughts a tangled mess. The encounter with the street vendor had shaken her to the core. She had always prided herself on her ability to judge art, to separate the genuine from the fake, the talented from the pretenders. But now, she wasn't so sure. Had she truly understood art all along? Or had she been blinded by her own arrogance, her own assumptions about what made something valuable? She needed answers. She couldn't let this go. The thought of the vendor, his face, his quiet confidence, his paintings kept swirling in her mind. It wasn't just about her mistake anymore, it was about something deeper. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She had to find him. Days passed, and the woman searched for the vendor, but he was nowhere to be found. She returned to the same street corner where she had seen him, hoping for some sign, some clue. But the spot was empty. The bustling crowds had moved on, and the vendor had disappeared as if he had never been there at all. She started to dig deeper, reaching out to her contacts in the art world, asking if anyone knew about a street artist with a reputation as elusive as his. At first, no one seemed to know anything. But then one evening, she received an unexpected message. It was a link to an art auction website. The title of the auction read, "The Hidden Masterpieces of a Forgotten Artist." Intrigued, she clicked on the link, and her heart skipped a beat. The paintings that were being auctioned were the same ones she had seen that day, the same ones the street vendor had been selling. Only now, they were being sold for millions. Each piece had been meticulously cataloged, with descriptions detailing the artist's incredible journey, his rise to fame, and his eventual retreat from the public eye. The woman's mind raced. She read through the descriptions, learning that the vendor was, in fact, a once celebrated artist who had chosen to step away from the art world's superficiality. He had grown disillusioned with the commercial side of the industry, where art was often reduced to a commodity, a price tag attached to every piece. Instead, he had returned to the streets, where he could create freely, without the constraints of galleries or critics. The more she read, the more she realized how wrong she had been. The vendor wasn't just an artist, he was a visionary, someone who had seen the flaws in the very system she had spent her career supporting. He had chosen to step away, to reclaim his art on his own terms. And in doing so, he had created something far more valuable than anything she had ever written about or praised. The woman felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had mocked him, dismissed his work without understanding it. She had reduced him to a stereotype, a street vendor, without ever considering the depth of his art or the reasons behind his choices. She had judged him based on appearances, on what she thought she knew about the world, and now she realized how much she had missed. But there was still one thing she didn't understand. Why had he kept his identity hidden for so long? Why had he let everyone believe that he was just another struggling artist? What was his purpose in keeping the truth a secret? Determined to find out, she reached out to a few of the artist's former colleagues, hoping to get some insight into his motivations. One of them, an old friend who had worked with the artist in his early days, agreed to meet with her. Over coffee, the friend explained that the artist had always been a private person, someone who valued his work more than fame or recognition. He had never been comfortable with the attention that came with success. When his work first gained popularity, he had felt like a fraud, as if he was part of a system that was exploiting his creativity for profit. Eventually, he withdrew from the art scene altogether, choosing instead to create for the sake of creation, not for accolades or sales. The friend explained that the artist had always believed that true art came from the heart, not from the need to impress others. He had chosen to live a quiet life, selling his work on the streets, hoping that those who truly appreciated it would find him. It wasn't about money or fame, it was about the purity of his craft. The woman listened, absorbing every word. She began to understand the artist's perspective, the reasons behind his decision to stay hidden. He hadn't wanted to be part of the commercialized art world, he had wanted to remain true to himself, to his art. And in doing so, he had created something far more powerful than anything the critics or collectors could ever understand. As the conversation came to a close, the woman thanked the friend and left the cafe, her mind swirling with new insights. She realized that her career, her life, had been built on a foundation of assumptions and judgments. She had spent years analyzing art from a distance, critiquing it without ever truly understanding it. But now, she had seen the other side. She had seen the artist's truth. The next day, she returned to the street where she had first encountered the vendor. She stood there waiting, hoping to see him again. And just as she was about to give up, she spotted him in the distance, sitting on a bench with his sketchbook in hand. This time, there was no mockery in her heart, only respect. She approached him slowly, her heart racing. When he saw her, he didn't seem surprised. He simply looked at her with a quiet intensity, as if he had known she would come. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But then, she spoke from the heart. "I was wrong," she said, her voice steady but sincere. "I judged you without knowing who you really were. I judged your art without understanding it. And I'm sorry." The artist didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded, as if he had expected her apology all along. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "It's not about being right or wrong," he said softly. "It's about understanding. You'll find that the more you learn, the less you'll know. Art isn't something to be understood, it's something to be felt." The woman stood there, taking in his words. She realized that this was the lesson she had needed all along. Art wasn't about labels or judgments. It was about connection, about the emotions it evoked and the stories it told. And in that moment, she knew that her perspective had changed forever. The vendor stood up, gathering his things. "You'll find your way," he said, offering a small smile. "Just don't forget to listen." With that, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd once more. The woman watched him go, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that she had much more to learn. But she also knew that she had taken the first step toward truly understanding art, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose. As she walked away, she couldn't help but reflect on the lessons she had learned. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, that true value often lay beneath the surface. She had learned that art wasn't just about the price tag or the fame, it was about the soul of the artist, the story behind the work. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest masterpieces were the ones that no one else could see. And as she moved forward in her career, she vowed to never forget the lesson of the street vendor, the lesson of humility, respect, and the power of truly understanding art.